Well, it's 10 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome to Gardening on the Gulf Coast. Today's topic is growing succulents on the Gulf Coast. We want to remind you of a few things before we get started, especially to turn off your microphone and camera. And the way you can do that is to hover your mouse around the kind of near the bottom of your screen, and you'll get this pop-up menu that's showing on the slide, and then you can click on the camera and the microphone. If they don't have a slash through them, they're still on. So please turn them off if they are on. If you have questions, please use the chat feature, and you can find that also on the toolbar. The other green arrow is pointing to that. Please keep all your questions in the chat, and we have people that will be answering them. Other agents with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, Stephen Brugerhoff, and myself, Ginger Easton Smith. And then as time allows, Stephen will also answer questions Kevin will answer questions in the presentation. So we're ready to begin, and I'd like to introduce Kevin Gibbs, who is the Horticulture agent in Nueces County with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. I want to say thank you to Stephen Brugerhoff and Ginger Easton Smith for assisting me this morning, and they're both terrific agents, and they'll do a great job answering questions. So we just want to get going, and I want to share with you this morning a few of the things that I've learned about cacti and succulent and growing them along the Texas coast. So I also want to say a special thank you to Cathy Fernandez, who's one of my Nueces Master Gardeners. She's actually our cacti and succulent, one of our gurus here on the coast, and she assisted me with preparing the presentation. So a lot of times when I don't know the answer to something related to cacti or succulent, I go to her and ask her. So I want to say thank you to Cathy. So succulents, they're members of the cactus family, or the Cactaceae family. They prefer full sun most of the time to part shade, but we found here along the coast that a lot of times in the summer our summer sun is too brutal for them, so we have to move them occasionally. Even though they're rated for full sun, we move them to areas where they're sheltered from some of that hot afternoon sun. And they do prefer well-drained soil, which can often be a problem here in the coastal bend. The coastal bend, most of our area is of course, Victoria clay, so it doesn't drain that well. So we'll discuss that in a moment and see what we can do about that. So in Nueces County, there are a couple of possibilities. You can either grow them in the ground,
got it.
Which presents a problem.
The app.
Growing them.
Go to install the.
Someone talking about installing the app needs to mute their microphone, please.
Okay, somebody muted me. So you can grow them in the ground, but that's a problem because of our clay soils and they don't drain that well. We also have excessive rainfall periods, and if you move along the Texas coast upwards towards Houston or Beaumont, there is a huge difference in the amount of rainfall that you get between the southern parts of the coast and the northern parts of the coast. So in the south, sometimes we're lucky if we get 20 or 25 inches of rainfall. Up in the Beaumont and Houston area, sometimes they're in excess of 50 inches of rainfall. So growing in the ground can be a real challenge. So the alternative to that is growing them in containers. Containers allows you to control all of the different aspects of drainage. It also allows you to control where you put them and to move them easily if they're getting too much sun. So a lot of times here along the coast, we'll grow them in containers. That way we can move them around and get them into a situation, an environment that is very suitable for them. We find that it's much easier and that the drainage is much easier to control. So if you decide to grow them in the ground, what are some things that you can do? In clay soils, you can add sand. We do know that you could never add enough sand to a clay soil to get it where it drains wonderfully, but you can temporarily amend a small area. If you're going to add sand, you want to add about a foot of sand and work it in. You could also add gravel. Gravel is a choice if you have easy access to gravel. So the same way with that, add the gravel in to help improve the drainage. So let's talk a little bit about soil if you're going to use containers. So there are container mixes out there. There's cactus mixes out there. They're fairly expensive and they come in fairly small bags. You can also mix your own by mixing equal parts of a coarse sand, a cactus mix. You can put in grit, pumice, which is a volcanic rock, perlite, and then lava fines, which are the sands or the fines from lava. And then you could also use poultry grit. So some different containers. You have containers such as tin, plastic, ceramic, glass, and clay, and then concrete. There are some problems with each of these containers. The clay containers actually drain very well. They allow some of the excess moisture out through the clay, and they're fairly stable in some of our high wind areas. One of the problems that we see with clay pots is that the salts that accumulate in the water will sweat out and they'll turn this outer part of the clay pot kind of a crusty white. And there's not a whole lot that you can do to avoid that except just clean the pots frequently. The problem with a glass container is that generally they don't have any drainage in the bottom of them. So if you use a glass container, you're going to have to be really careful to make sure not to overwater them. Tin containers work well here. It's easy to drill holes in the bottom of them. They do, however, rust whenever they have the salt spray or the ocean mist that gets on them. Some people actually kind of like this kind of rustic looking result from the rust on these metal containers. Ceramic containers are good. They drain very well. They do not allow excess moisture out though because the pot is coated. For a good temporary container, plastic pots are a great choice. And then clay pots are a good choice also, although they're very, very heavy. So just consider that when you're picking a pot for your area. So a few questions about how to propagate succulents. There's really two methods for propagating succulents. You can either do the leaf propagation method, and that's where you simply pluck off some of the leaves. You just barely put down the leaves in a mixture of soil and perlite or soil and sand, and then use a misting bottle until they begin to sprout. This is actually a very easy method for propagation. The second method of propagation is to take cuttings. So you take an entire stem cutting and you remove some of the lower leaves. You want to get as close to a node as you can, so that a little under the node, so that you have a rooting area. And this method works quite well as well. Before I move on to talking about plants, Ginger or Stephen, do we have any questions?
No, we're good right now. Thank you.
All right. So we've arranged the plants we're going to talk about today into groups of small, medium, and large. So the first one is going to be our small category. And the first plant we're going to talk about is Cabbage Agave, which is Agave parasana. They generally will get between 1 and 2 feet tall and get about 2 feet across. They have remarkable cold tolerance. They're tolerant down to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So these work all the way from the southern parts of the coast all the way up to the northern parts of the coast. Most of the time, none of us are going to get below 15 degrees. They do prefer full sun and do very well in full sun or part sun setting. They bloom infrequently, and unfortunately, it will die after it blooms. So, but they're easy to propagate off of the bloom because they'll put pups all along the stem, and then they'll also make pups along the bottom of the plant where it's died. And then you can propagate them from the seeds that are produced as well. They are very slow growing. So if you're looking for something quick, this is probably not a great choice. So here's what a cabbage agave persona looks like. They have extremely sharp barbs on the tips, but they have a really, really cool pattern. You notice this person planted them in a cinder block. There's another one a little bit older. And then here's a third one. This is an absolutely beautiful picture. So that's a good choice for the Texas coast. Next, we're going to talk about Campfire Crassula, which is Capitula Campfire, Crassula Capitula Campfire. It also gets up to 2 feet tall and up to 2 feet wide. It's considered to be a ground cover type succulent. And it's cold tolerant down to 30 degrees, it's down to 30 degrees. So in some of the northern parts of the area, if they get below 30 degrees, it may kill out Crassula. They're good in full sun to light shade, and they bloom they bloom in the summer, and they have fragrant flowers in the spring. So this is a beautiful ground cover, and Cathy says this is a great choice if you're looking for a spiller in pots, something that you want to hang over in the front of a succulent mixture. So here's what that looks like. There's another picture of it. She also wanted me to relay to you that the amount of redness changes with the amount of light that the plant gets. So the more sun that it gets, the brighter the red will be on the foliage. And then if you move it to a little bit less sunlight, it's going to go back to green or a lighter shade of red. Next, we have paddle plant, which is Kalanchoe thyriciflora. They get up, they're fairly short, 2 to 3 inches. They're a spreading ground cover. They're cold tolerant down to 27 degrees. They're adapted to morning sun or dappled sun. So this is not a great choice for your full sun settings, but if you've got a great spot on the patio that gets morning sun, this is a good choice for it. They bloom in the summer, and they have fragrant flowers in the spring, and their flowers are showy. And special note to use a very coarse soil of sand and organic matter for this plant. So here are what they look like. It's a really cool plant. And again, the color varies with the amount of light that they're getting. There it is in a green form. Next, we have Fred Ives, Graptopetalum Fred Ives, a height of 8 to 10 inches, about 1 foot or 12 inches across. It's cold tolerant down to 20 degrees. Prefers full sun to filtered shade. So you can put it on your covered patio where it gets morning sun, or you can put it out in full sun. I will say again, though, we found sometimes if you see that your succulents are struggling in full sun, you might want to back them out to a spot that is sheltered from a little bit of that really hot afternoon sun. The blooms on them are pale yellow with a red-orange center on arching stems, so these are really cool for that. And they have a broad, waxy, pearly bronze to purplish, sometimes yellow, orange, blue-green leaf. So here's what Fred Ives looks like. And that one shows the flowers with the red or orange centers. Here's another picture of Fred Ives. Okay, we're fixing to move on to spillers. Do we have any questions, Ginger?
Yes, there's a question about soil.
Mm-hmm.
Well, or the question hasn't been typed out exactly, but I think it's probably about soil mix, drainage,
Mm-hmm.
And also a problem with ants.
Okay, ants are going to be a problem no matter what. I found that you can spritz a little bit of white vinegar around the bottom or the openings of the pot, and sometimes that will keep the ants at bay. But sometimes you have no choice but to put a little bit of ant killer down in the bottom of the pot. Anybody, either one of you, have any suggestions for controlling ants?
I like the vinegar idea.
Yeah, I've had pretty good luck with that. It also works for gnats or soil-borne flies that sometimes hatch in the fungal material up in the top of the pot. You can spritz a little bit of vinegar on there. Just keep the vinegar away from the plant. And then I'll go back to the slide about drainage when I'm done and address that for that person. Okay.
That's great.
All right. So now we're moving on to spillers. These are things that are great in mixed pots that you want to come out over the edges. The first one we're going to talk about is Agavoides lipstick, which is echeverria Agavoides lipstick. Gets up to a height of 6 inches, about 1 foot across. Is cold tolerant down to 15 degrees and prefers morning sun or part shade. And they bloom in early summer with a red to yellow tip. And they have apple green leaves with vivid red pink edges. So let's take a look and see what Agavoides lipstick looks like. Really cool. There's one. There's another one. And there's a third one. And Cathy wanted me to tell you that there are a ton of different varieties of Agavoides lipstick. So to get out there and look. Next, we're going to talk about ghost plant, which is Scraptopetalum paraguayense. It gets up to a height of about 12 inches and a width of 2 to 3 feet. And it's cold tolerant down to 20 degrees. I hope you're noticing a pattern in cold tolerance. A lot of people think that succulents are not very cold tolerant, but for the most part, they are. We have some from warmer climates of the world which don't put up with much below freezing, but for the most part, most of our succulents are good down to at least 25 degrees. Ghost plants prefer full sun to part shade or filtered shade. They bloom in the spring. They have a yellowish pink pearlescent leaves in full sun with a bluish gray tone in the shade. So here is what ghost plant looks like. I bet you've all seen it before. It's very popular and very common in nurseries. There's another one. You can see how magnificent the blooms are spilling out of that container on the wall. And there's a third one. Okay, next we have Veera Higgins, Graptosedum Veera Higgins. Veera gets to about 1 foot tall and 1 to 2 feet wide and is cold tolerant down to 25 to 30 degrees. Prefers sun or shade and will bloom the spring through the summer with yellow blossoms. And it's a clumping or trelling plant with reddish bronze foliage. Okay, so here are some pictures of Veera Higgins. Notice how wonderful it looks as used kind of like a ground cover around this taller succulent. And there's another one. Ginger, I see a question about propagating spillers.
Yes. Is this a good time to address that?
Sure. You can propagate spillers the same way that you propagate other succulents. You can either take leaf cuttings off of them or you could take entire stem cuttings off of them. They work either way. So either method is great for propagating them. Now we're moving on to medium succulents. The first one that we have is red yucca, which is Hesperaloe parviflora, sorry. It gets up to 5 feet tall. I'm guessing most of you have used red yucca or have seen red yucca at some point. It has a width of 2 to 4 feet. It's cold tolerant down to 15 degrees. And it is definitely a full sun plant. It does not want to be in the shade whatsoever. You'll see these grown all around the state. So they work well in other places too, but do not like shade. They have blooms that are red to pink bell-shaped flowers on stalks up to 8 feet tall, and they have long, narrow, arching leaves. And the seeds are a good source of nutrition for birds, and hummingbirds love red yucca. They're very attracted to the flowers. So here is red yucca. I can't see why anybody wouldn't like red yucca, but I'm sure there's somebody out there that doesn't. There's another one. And I particularly like the way the leaves unfurl and leave these little threads that are along there. So do we have questions, Ginger?
Well, there was a specific question about a lime echeverria that might do well. Sorry, I have to find it. That wouldn't be susceptible to crown rot. I don't know if that's a specific you want to get into now.
I have that person to email me and I'll get an answer for them.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Next in the medium category is Perry's agave, Agave Perrii. It gets to a height of 2 to 3 inches, 2 to 3 feet, sorry, and a width of 2 to 3 feet. It's very cold tolerant, down to 10 degrees. It prefers full sun, but will tolerate a little bit of light shade. And it blooms 10 to 30 growing seasons after it started growing. So this is one of those agaves that grows forever and then finally blooms and then dies. It's slow growing with relatively short, wide, grayish green leaves. So there's Perry's agave. In the back, I believe you have golden barrel cactus. This is a really nice picture, the way that they've arranged those and clumped those together. And then this one also. Climbing aloe is next, Aloe ciliaris. It gets up to 12 feet tall. Most people are used to growing aloe vera plants, but most people do not have climbing aloe. So it's a pretty interesting plant. It's a wide-spreading plant. It has to be protected from frost, though. It will not tolerate freezing weather very well. It's generally grown in full sun, but I've had good luck with it in part sun as well. And it has red-orange blooms year-round. It has hooked or recurved leaves, which allow the aloe to basically anchor itself to things. So that gives it its name, climbing aloe. And here is what it looks like. In this picture, it almost looks like regular aloe vera, but you can begin to see how it's different from regular aloe vera as it begins to get longer stems and get some of these looking things. There's a nice picture of the bloom, which looks very similar to a regular aloe vera bloom, but they can get much taller than aloe vera and give on the aspect of climbing. So next we have a fishhook barrel cactus, which is Phaerocactus wisleysii. Can get up to 11 feet tall and a width of 3 feet tall. And they are frost tolerant, full sun to part shade. And they have orange-red flowers growing in the crown of the cactus from April to September. They're prominently ribbed with fierce, heavy spines also. So these guys are very ferocious. There you can see a fishhook cactus. And there is a very old fishhook cactus. And there's the spines, why you can see where it gets its name, fishhook. Okay, I see some questions coming in, Ginger.
Well, one was about the aloe plant, would it kill the plant if there was a freeze for 24 to 48 hours?
It possibly could, yes. They're from a tropical region and they don't tolerate freezing weather very well. So it's one of the few on this list today that won't tolerate at least a light freeze. So yes, you would have to protect it. Okay, now we're moving on to tall succulents. We have purple prickly pear cactus, which is Opuntia macrocentra. The particular variety we're looking at is Santa Rita. They get up to 6 feet tall with a height of 8 feet, with a width of 8 feet. Anybody that knows regular prickly pear knows that it spreads quite a bit. They're very cold tolerant down to 25 degrees, full sun to part shade. They have large blooms that are multi-petaled and yellow in the early spring. Prickly pear cactus flowers are very beautiful. And they're covered in spines and they turn a rich purple in the winter and soft blue-gray in spring and summer. So they're purple in the winter, but kind of a bluish-gray the rest of the year. And they are a food source for birds. So I had someone tell me that they've been looking for one of these and having a difficult time finding them. So we're going to talk about some ways that you can find some of these different cacti or succulents in just a moment. So here's what purple prickly pear, Opuntia macrocentra Santa Rita looks like. Looks just like the regular prickly pear, except got this purple color. They're very sought after. Here's another picture. And a third picture. You can see it's not quite as purple as it was. So this is more the bluish gray color. We have Ocotillo, Vulgaria splendens. These guys are tall, up to 10 feet tall. And they're very widespreading and arching. They're very cold tolerant, down to 10 degrees. And they definitely are a full sun plant. I have some master gardeners that tell me that they have ocotillos that they have never watered ever, and that they're still beautiful and doing well. So they have bright pink flowers on whip-like canes, and they have to have a well-drained soil. So this is one that if you're going to put it in the ground, you're definitely going to have to do a little bit of amending to make it work. And they may lose their leaves in an extreme drought, but as soon as it begins to rain or the drought's over, the leaves will pop right back on. And they require little to no irrigation once they're established. So this is a very drought tolerant plant. So there's Ocotillo. You can drive through parts of West Texas and you can see these Ocotillo and also into New Mexico and see them blooming. They're absolutely magnificent when you're driving through there and they're blooming. They have very beautiful flowers as well. And then just something of interest, the canes of the Ocotillo are actually taken and they make furniture out of them. So once the canes have died, they take them and they use them everywhere that these spines are. The spines fall off and there's holes there. And so you have this really unique wooden furniture that's full of all these holes where the spines were. There is a grouping. It would be an excellent plant if you were trying to develop a thorny hedge where you didn't want certain animals or things to come through your yard. But it also could be dangerous for grandkids or possibly even your pets because they're very, very thorny.
Kevin.
Yes, ma'am.
Before you get on to tips for buying, would you want to talk about watering succulents? What's the best method? There's, people that have lost plants because they were too dry or too wet.
There are all different kinds of methods for watering succulents. Most of us are hand watering succulents, but what I'm told is one of the better methods is actually drip irrigation. That if you have a bed of succulents, running a drip system into the bed works really, really well. If you're hand watering, I generally recommend that you try to keep the water as close to the bottom of the plant and keep it off of the crown. The best time to water is going to be first thing in the morning. And then I've also found that cacti and succulents come with kind of this idea that they need almost no water. Well, I actually do much better with them if I just allow the plant to kind of give me those signs that it's thirsty. So for example, I just let them go good and dry before I water them again. I don't let them go completely bone dry. So, and then I can have some of them that are a little bit glossy, and I can see the loss of shine in the leaves, and that gives me some idea that they're ready to be watered. So I have a crown of thorns that I water probably about every 3 days, and people tell me, you're watering that too much. Well, in South Texas, along this coast, it gets so hot, and they need to be watered a little bit more frequently. So learn your plants, learn what they like, what they do well with, and water them accordingly. I also found if you let them go way too dry, they are more prone to disease. So, but with the same thing said, if you keep them too wet, it's a recipe for disaster as well. So make sure that they go nice and dry, but try watering them whenever the plant's giving you the signs that they're getting a little bit starved for water. So you're very welcome. Any more questions before I move on, Ginger?
I think we're getting the other ones answered in the chat.
Okay, we're actually not too far from the end. So some tips for buying succulents. I talked to Cathy yesterday. I talked to several other people yesterday about buying succulents, and sometimes they're really hard to find the ones that you're looking for. They tell me the first thing you should do is start with your local nurseries. Go in. Some nurseries carry a good supply, a good stock of succulents. Others do not. So learn which ones of your local nurseries have good supplies of succulents. Also find out what time of the year they're most likely to ship new succulents in, because if you can figure out when the new succulents are coming in and be there, you'll be able to pick out the ones that you want. And that's what your succulent folks do. They go in as soon as they know that the shipment's coming in, and they pick out all the unique stuff, and they leave all the stuff that they all have had for years. So I was also told that sometimes at the big box stores that you can find some pretty decent succulents there. You just have to catch them when they first come in before, I think the words that were used is before they have had a chance to murder them. So a good way if you're searching for them online is to put both the scientific name and the common name in the search. And a lot of times that will find the correct plant that you're looking for. If you put in just the common name, as you all know, there are a lot of times that many different plants have that same common name, but you add that scientific name in there and it narrows it down really quickly for you. And then I was told that joining online groups is a terrific way to get some of those unique succulents that you're wanting, that there are some really good Facebook groups that are all about succulents, and those folks will share stuff all the time. I was told that for some people that's the #1 way that they get their different succulents is through their online groups. We do have some local succulent societies. I know there's one here. I'm imagining that there's several along the coast as well. That's a good way to get with succulent people, cacti and succulent people, and get their local knowledge and the resources that they have available also. And then the last tip I have for you is to avoid plants from vastly different climates. So an example that was given to me is if it is a succulent that is native to the Washington state coast, it's probably not going to do very well here because of the extreme difference in the climates. We do have an enormous amount of succulents and cacti that are native to Texas. One of the great places where you can look at native plants is your local native plant society. You also can go to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Research Center and put in the names, and you can find native plants there as well. So those are great resources as well.
Kevin,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
have a question about repotting succulents,
Okay.
sort of in general, but also, is it okay to repot it now when it's so hot?
If it's a succulent that's going to sit out in the extreme hot sun, I probably would wait till spring or fall to repot it. If it's a succulent that is getting afternoon shade, you're probably fine repotting it right now. And then as far as repotting, it's not that different than repotting a regular houseplant. The warning that I have to give people is that the leaves of succulents can break off fairly easily. So you may want to wrap some newspaper or a scarf or something around them to kind of hold the leaves in place when you're repotting. Cardboard, if you have cardboard that you can kind of loosen up and roll up, that works really well. But yes, the leaves will break off pretty easily, and you'll be mad that some of your pretty leaves have fallen off. However, if they do, use them for propagation. And then just use your soil mixture that you have either created or that you have purchased. Any other questions, Ginger?
Yes. What about fertilizing succulents?
You can fertilize succulents on a regular basis. They generally do better with kind of a weak fertilizer solution. You can go in and actually purchase fertilizers for cacti and succulents. But I found just a regular all-purpose fertilizer works just fine. I usually just kind of use it at about half strength, so nothing too strong. However, my succulents that are out on the patio, I have a fertilizer injector, and I use it on them on a regular basis and have no problems. So yes, I think you can fertilize them just with a regular all-purpose fertilizer.
Do you think liquid is better than granular?
I use a liquid, yes. However, you could use an coated fertilizer if you want to use Osmocote or something like that, and put some of that microencapsulated fertilizer. That would work just fine as well. I would not use anything that was granulated that began to break down immediately, though, because it can get pretty hot. So.
Could you talk some more about the soil mixture? You mentioned it early in your
Sure.
talk, but if you could just go over that again, please.
Sure. Let me go back to that slide, okay?
Particularly if someone wanted to mix their own soil mix.
Let's see here. Let's go to this slide right here. So for containers, if they, like I was saying, you can buy a container mix. They have them, cacti, and look, it says cactus, palm, and citrus soil. But it usually says cacti and succulent mix. You can buy those, but if you're doing a lot of succulents, this is going to get really expensive really fast. The better thing to do is to order the different components and make your own. So some of the things that you can order are coarse sand. That's a very useful in making your own mix. And then you can mix grit, pumice, perlite, lava fines, and poultry grit. Any of those work well. She tells me that what you're looking for is just something that is going to make it drain really well. So all of these are put in there to make it drain really well. And then you just mix equal parts of either this cactus mix or a potting mix. And then you mix in that with the coarse sand and with one of these. So it's a third of the cactus and succulent mix or the potting mix, a third sand, and then a third of one of these. Does that?
Okay. Yes, that helps a lot. And when you're talking about grit,
just that poultry grit that you buy at the feed store for your chickens.
Okay, is that the only grit? That's the grit you're referring to?
That's the grit that I'm referring to, yes.
Okay, and then as far as gravel, which you mentioned earlier, can it be any, is it any specific kind?
It is not. You can, as long as it has not been chemically treated, you can use any type of gravel that you want to. Now, as long as we're talking about gravel, there's a difference between gravel and like caliche. So a gravel, I prefer a fine gravel. If you've ever been to any of the deserts or gardens where they're growing cactus, you usually see a fairly fine gravel that's being used, but no, a larger gravel would work as well if that's what you have available to yourself. But if you're purchasing, I think a fine gravel works much better.
And would you get beach sand for that coarse sand?
I absolutely would not get beach sand. There's a couple of reasons that you would stay away from beach sand. Beach sand has a very high pH because of the salt water that it has come from. And then it also is very likely full of seeds from lots of different plants that are out there, particularly grass burrs. We see a lot of the sand on the island that you're going to get a whole bucket full of grass burr seeds if you get that sand from there. So you would probably want to find a clean source for sand. And you can buy it by the bag, and it goes quite a ways.
Great. And then
I will say this also, Ginger, the coarse sand, if you're buying it by the bag, the coarse sand works better than the fine sand.
Okay, great. That's very useful. When people talk about a pup, when they're referring to succulents, what is that?
A pup is basically a young plant that starts off down near the bottom of the existing succulent or cacti. And its whole purpose, it's usually coming up, and its whole purpose is intended to replace that mother plant whenever that mother plant passes away or dies. What a lot of people will do is remove those pups and pot them up and grow them into a full-grown plant as well.
And could you describe a little bit more about how you would do that? You're just going to...
You usually can, they usually break off very easily, or you can take your little gardening spade or your little gardening tool, and you can just loosen the soil around the bottom. But sometimes they're attached to the mother plant and sometimes they're rooted in at the bottom. So it depends on how they're growing. But they usually already have preformed roots. So if you remove them, clip them off or remove them from the plant, remove some of that excess stem, and they usually have preformed roots along that stem and root up very, very easily. Anything else?
Would you let that dry, the pup, would you talk about whether you'd let it dry off before you plant it? And also with cuttings, there was a question about letting them dry.
The pups would not necessarily have to be laid to the side and allowed to dry because they already have preformed roots. The purpose of allowing the cuttings to heal over a little bit is to basically form a seal over that fresh cut. And so, yes, you want to lay those to the side for a day or so, sometimes up to 2 or 3 days, let them kind of heal over and then put them in. So. All right. Anything else for me, Ginger?
I don't see any others. Do you, Stephen?
No, there was a question of whether or not builder's sand is preferable over play sand.
Coarse sand is always preferable over a fine sand, and pick the one out. The builder sand is usually what I'm going to get. So, do either one of you have a preference?
I agree with builder sand is the best.
Same here.
All right. So with that said, let's go back to the schedule. Oh, we won't go back to the schedule.
Kevin, while you're doing that, I'd forgotten to mention that this presentation is being recorded and it will be available. Everyone will receive the link to it, and also all the previous presentations are all available on YouTube on the same YouTube channel that you'll get the link to.
That's correct, Ginger, and you'll also get a short survey today, and we really value your feedback. We take the information that you give us and helps us to shape what goes on with the rest of the programming. So it's a very short survey and doesn't take very long, so I'll be sending out that Qualtrics survey as well. So just a little bit about the upcoming presentations. Next week we have Fabulous Figs for the Gulf Coast with Stephen Brigroff, who's assisting us today. Stephen, do you want to take a moment to tell them anything about that program? Or
we'll be talking about varieties appropriate for the Gulf Coast gardening, which is from here down in Nueces County. We're up in Brazoria County, near Galveston. We'll also be talking a little bit about tips and techniques you can use to improve your home orchard. So stay tuned for we'll see you next week.
All right, thank you, Stephen. And then the week after that, we have Skip Richter from Brazos County. He's the horticulture agent there, and he'll be talking about earth-kind pest, disease, and weed control. I don't know if Skip's on here today, but we have these actually scheduled all the way through December. So we appreciate you joining us and asking the great questions that you do. I appreciate the people that assisted me today with answering questions, and I hope that we've done a good job of helping you. This by no means is all the different cacti or succulents that could grow along the Texas coast. We just had to pick a handful of ones that we really, really like and we think do really, really well. So if you have any further questions, you can always email me as well. I'll put up that slide next. You can reach me at kevin.gibbs@ag.tamu.edu, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Are there any further questions before we end the program today?
No, I don't see any.
All right. Well, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Well, someone asked, could we send the Eventbrite link with the YouTube link to register?
I think we could. Yeah, I think we probably could. We'll ask Lindsay and find out, okay?
And you'll receive the YouTube link in the email.
All right. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you for taking your time to and spend a little bit of it with us. And we hope you have a wonderful time gardening, and hopefully things will be back to normal pretty soon, and we'll be able to see some of you in person. Thank you, and have a great week.